Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Today we're going to start out with a brief mention of an inventor. That inventor was Cassagnes, who died recently at the age of 86, and Cassagnes invented the Etch-A Sketch. As a young man in Paris, Mr. Cassagnes worked as an electrical technician. Through his work, he noticed that he could create images by raking through fine bits of metallic particles, and this led to the initial design of the Etch-A Sketch. The Etch-A Sketch is basically the underside of a screen coated with fine aluminum powder, and there are knobs that control a stylus hidden beneath the screen. Since the Etch-A Sketch became popular in the 1950s, the screen was designed like a television screen, and when you turn the knobs, the stylus scrapes through the powder in vertical or horizontal lines. Then you can just erase the image by shaking the toy, which recoats the screen with the aluminum. And they put in tiny plastic beads mixed with the aluminum powder so that it doesn't clump. A very simple design, although I never figured out how to get rounded lines from the Etch-A Sketch. The Ohio Art Company bought the design from Mr. Cassagnes. They promoted it on television during the baby boomer era. It was sort of the perfect baby boomer toy a couple of years after the hula hoop. You know, we're talking the 1960s here. And eventually over 100 million were sold, and it was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame in 1998. And the national toy industry has named it one of the 100 best toys of the 20th century. It's been computerized and jazzed up since then, but the Etch-A Sketch still works according to its basic design. And we have the Frenchman Cassagnes to thank for one of the great toys of the 20th century, the Etch-A Sketch. We're going to move on now to Paire Davis, who was one of the great female baseball players of the 1940s and 1950s in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Miss Davis died recently at the age of 88. If you're unfamiliar with the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, you probably haven't seen the movie A League of Our Own, where she was one of the models for the Gina Davis character Dottie Hinson. In real life, the league was founded during World War II by chewing gum magnate P.K. Wrigley. I worked for P.K. Wrigley in the early 70s, and I can tell you the one thing I remember about him was that he was careful with his money. And I think that during the war, he was worried about his investment in the Chicago Cubs and in Major League Baseball. When many of the Major League players were at war and the quality of the Major League product was watered down. So to retain the interest in baseball, he started the Women's League. And he founded it primarily with players from the Midwest, although he took some of the players from Southern California, like Paire Davis. The league was primarily teams from Midwestern cities. So Miss Davis, who was a great softball player in Southern California, went on to play for the Minneapolis Millerettes, the Fort Wayne Daisies, the Racine Bells, and the Grand Rapids Chicks. Here near the end of her life, Miss Davis talks about her experience playing professional baseball in the 1940s and early 1950s.
It took 60 years for our story to be finally told, and that really happened because Major League Baseball was always very jealous of us and never really wanted to admit that we succeeded. And that's a fact. In 1944, in spring training for our league, if you remember the movie, the members of the All-American League. I don't know, those of you. If anybody here didn't see the movie, raise your hand. We played every night in the week in double headers on Sundays and holidays and traveled at the same time. We had no off days. And if we had maybe 2 or 3 off days out of the entire year, we would spend one of those at Percy Jones General Hospital, Fort Myers in Chicago, and we would play an exhibition ball game. And that because we felt like we were doing our part for the war effort. And that was really what that All-American meant, All-American baseball. It meant Chevy at the levee, mom's home cooking. It did not mean like an All-American star. It just meant All-American baseball. And then I'd come back home in the winter, and my mom would baby me, but I would get a job and work to the winter because we didn't get paid in the off-season. We got paid very good money for the time. We got paid, it came in at first, you got, as a rookie, from $50 to $75 a week. I got $75. You got a big $2.25 meal money, and you stayed with some of the prestigious residents in your hometown, and on the road, they paid all the expenses. So basically, that was quite a bit of money to be making. Later on, as I got to be a star, I made $120 a week, or $110 a week, which was the maximum salary. There was a minimum and a maximum. And that was what I earned. I worked at a gas station, Standard Oil was trying to hire women because of the war. And they put me in purple overalls with my red hair traded. In my career, I was traded 3 different times. The league had a policy, major leagues I think could kind of learn from, that if one team was too strong and one team was too weak, they would take a strong ball player and trade it for a weaker ball player, so that the fans would have a shot at their ball games winning games. So I got traded actually because of that 3 times in my career. And all 3 times that I was traded, the team I went to won the pennant. So I like to think I am playing all baseball rules, but playing pitching underhand and with bases that were slightly longer than softball. Every year, the ball got smaller, the mound went back, the bases went back, went from sidearm, from underhand to sidearm to overhand pitching, till we got totally to baseball. So we learned it, we were in our formative years, we learned it growing up, little by little, and we became darn good ball players because of that. And we became able to throw those distances and run those bases or sacks. We had to be dressed, skirts and blouses at the very least. And so when we got on the bus to travel all night in the heat and no air conditioning or nothing like that, we would have our shorts underneath and our t-shirts underneath. And then we would, discard our skirts and our blouses on the bus. But to get off that bus, we had to put it all back on. They had to wear a babushka on their hair if they had to have their hair up in curlers. And those big old curlers.
Miss Davis went on to become a consultant to Penny Marshall for the movie A League of Our Own. You have to give Penny Marshall a lot of credit for telling that story. That was one of the unsung stories of heroism during World War II. It's not just a story about baseball, as you can tell. Miss Davis is also one of the people who's credited with the famous line, "There's no crying in baseball," that Tom Hanks used in the movie. Here's his character manager, Jimmy Dugan, bawling out one of the characters, who was not, by the way, the Pepper Davis character.
Hey, Evelyn, can I ask you a question? You got a moment? Mm-hmm. Which team do you play for?
Well, I'm a peach.
Well, I was just wondering, because I couldn't figure out why you would throw home when we've got a 2-run lead. You let the tying run get on second, and we lost the lead because of you. Now you start using your head. That's that love that's 3 feet above your ass. Are you crying?
No.
Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball.
Why don't you leave her alone, Jimmy?
Oh, you zip it, Doris. Rogers Hornsby was my manager, and he called me a talking pile of pig shit. And that was when my parents drove all the way down from Michigan to see me play the game. And did I cry? No. And you know why?
No.
Because there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball. No crying.
What's the matter, Jimmy?
What? She's crying, sir.
I didn't mean to do that.
Perhaps you chastise her too vehemently. Good rule of thumb. Treat each of these girls as you would treat your mother.
Okay, Tom Hanks may have overdone it a little bit there, but as I said, no crying in baseball, one of the great lines in movies. The Women's League couldn't last once the men came back from the war. They stuck it out for almost another 10 years. But Wrigley had to pull the plug once the men came back, and also once Jackie Robinson made it to the major leagues. Those cultural shifts left the Women's League as a footnote in history. They were certainly heroes in their own way, and we might not even know about it if it wasn't for Penny Marshall and her movie and great players like Pepper Davis. We're going to move on now to Ed Koch, who died recently at the age of 88. And there's some sort of unwritten rule that if you're the mayor of New York, you either have to be colorful, contentious, or both. And Ed Koch was certainly both. He was the mayor of New York from 1978 to 1989. And to put it in perspective, in the late 60s and early 70s, New York was really deteriorating. The city, from Midtown Manhattan to Harlem to the Bronx to Brooklyn, was dirty. It was crime-ridden. They were having problems with finances. They were having problems with labor. They were having all sorts of problems that had built up over many years after World War II, and many people thought that the city was unsalvageable. During the 1976 presidential campaign, there was a famous headline in the New York Daily News referring to the Republican presidential candidate Gerald Ford. The headline said, "Ford to New York City, drop dead." Ford never actually said that, and he lost the election anyway, but that statement took on its own life all over the country. Along comes Ed Koch in 1978, and he helped revitalize the city. Here's a New York City television report on the death of Ed Koch.
We have some breaking news to bring you. We've just learned that former New York City Mayor Ed Koch has passed. Ed was 88 years old. Of course, he served here in New York City as the mayor from 1978 until 1989 and was still such a strong political force and quite a character and so beloved by both sides of the political aisle and by the city and the nation, really.
Here's ABC 7's Diana Williams.
We don't know yet the sacrifices all of us will have to make to get this city back on its feet.
Pain and sacrifice. That's what newly elected Mayor Ed Koch prepared New Yorkers for on election night back in 1977. He was about to become the city's 105th mayor. The city was broke, crime was up, and the subways were a mess.
You can level with the people of this city, even during a political campaign.
Cynics declared the city couldn't be governed, but Ed Koch went to work. He slashed budgets and restored the city's credit, making the Big Apple solvent again. But more importantly, he changed the mood of the city.
Give this man a big prize.
Joking with people on the street and offering his trademark greeting.
How am I doing? Not too well.
The mood, though, changed again when transit workers went on strike in April of 1980. Mayor Koch stood his ground.
I just want to thank you for all that you're going through and the courage that you're showing.
Few can forget the image of Koch greeting commuters as they walked across the Brooklyn Bridge. The strike lasted 11 days, and in the end, he defeated the union.
You're making it possible for the city to stand up and do what's right.
Ed Koch was always one to stand up for what he believed in. He was born in 1924 in the Morrisania section of the Bronx to parents of Polish-Jewish descent. He entered politics as a liberal, elected to city council and then Congress. At one point, he ran for governor. But his love for the city may have cost him the job when he told a reporter with Playboy magazine that rural areas were a joke and that, quote, living in Albany would be a fate worse than death. Koch was never one to mince words, and often those words came back to haunt him. But voters still elected him to a third term as mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
By the late 80s, though, voters were growing weary. Koch's third term was shaken by scandal, and he upset African-American voters with his criticism of Jesse Jackson. Koch further inflamed racial tensions following the brutal murder of a young black man, Yusuf Hawkins, by a group of white men in Bensonhurst. At the time, many in the black community felt Koch was insensitive when he spoke out against the people who took to the streets protesting the racial violence. In 1989, the fourth term that Koch wanted so much eluded him. He lost the Democratic primary to David Dinkins.
This job is special. You impact on the lives of people, and they have an opportunity to tell you whether they like it or dislike it. So, that is irreplaceable.
I'm Ed Koch.
Koch remained extremely active after leaving office. Even with failing health, he was out campaigning for Mayor Bloomberg's re-election for a third term. He wrote books and newspaper columns and appeared on TV shows and movies, often portraying himself.
Mr. Mayor, there's an emergency. Hold on, everybody. I'm looking for a frog who can sing and dance.
If he can also balance the budget, I'll hire him.
After all, it was the role he relished the most.
Thank you, and God bless.
Yeah, his trademark phrases you heard was, "How am I doing?" Well, on the negative side, in the 1980s, the AIDS activists did not like him. They would not have given him a favorable rating. AIDS was a major scourge in New York City then. They lost about 30,000 people. In fairness to him, I'm not sure there was a whole lot he could have done in the age before antiretrovirals, but many AIDS activists feel, rightly or wrongly, that he didn't do as much as he should have during the AIDS epidemic. And as you heard there, he also had problems with racial tensions during his administration. Here is the trailer from the movie Koch, which came out recently, about his life.
Whenever I would fly home, there was the city of New York laid out before me. And I thought to myself, this belongs to me.
In 1977, the city was on the verge of bankruptcy. Businesses were leaving, families were leaving. Anybody who could leave would.
Good morning. I'm Ed Koch.
Etch, and I'm running for mayor, and I need your help. How am I doing?
Here was a guy who really represented the rough and tumble of New York, and he was just haunted and damned by one hell of a personality.
Shut up, will you, and let me talk to these people?
I knew that of all those who were running, I knew more than they did.
There was a sense of momentum building. At the same time, so did the rumors.
There were signs in all the trains to vote for Cuomo, not the homo.
Why have you never married?
Well, I've always thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to be married and raise a mansion?
You have to get the attention of the public. You got to get them to follow you. And you can only do that by being bigger than life.
He's a national figure. What he says matters on everything.
The last time I was around an elevator, I peed on the governor.
Koch has lived his life in the public.
Am I doing all right? Thank you. Hi, everybody.
That is his family. I think it's his oxygen.
The assumption was mayors capitulate. Koch said no.
And it was a word that most New Yorkers had not heard before.
It doesn't move me. It doesn't change me.
In his third term, this is where the tide turned on.
We're dying. The city is dying.
There was no medication whatsoever, which was a total nightmare.
His government looked as corrupt as any government ever had.
I went into a state of depression.
He saw it all slipping away.
Well, I think I was a crook. I can't bear that.
He created a second life for himself. He's been a political force. He still enjoys the battle.
People would say, oh, you must run again. You must run again. And I would say, no. People threw me out, and now the people must be punished. And people love that. I still say it occasionally.
How am I doing? Thank you. Am I doing all right?
You get a good idea of who Ed Koch was. Of course, he died on the morning that movie was scheduled to be released. Better to give it a little more publicity. That was Ed Koch. We're going to close tonight with Michael Winner, who is a British film director who died at the age of 78. He wasn't a great film director, but he's most well known because he did the Death Wish series, the memorable vigilante series with Charles Bronson. Here's British television and Michael Winner.
The flamboyant film director and restaurant critic Michael Winner has died following a long illness. He made more than 30 films, including the blockbuster Death Wish series. And as Nina Nana reports, a younger generation will remember him for his starring role in television adverts.
He would, he once said, always be remembered as the Death Wish director, the controversial series of vigilante films he made in the 70s and 80s.
You're not wandering about, you are firing.
But Michael Winner reinvented himself many times since, and at each turn he remained opinionated and outspoken, a true one-off in filmmaking and later writing. To more recent TV audiences, Michael Winner was the man in the insurance advert who coined that annoying phrase.
Calm down, dear. It's a commercial.
But in his heyday, Winner had worked with cinema's greats like Marlon Brando and Robert Mitchum.
You'll now see me crash a Bentley, not for the first time.
He was a man famed for enjoying the good things in life, and his no-holds-barred restaurant reviews for the Sunday Times were a huge hit.
Here he is in a brief interview on British television as to why he may have gotten out of the movies.
Is veteran film director and producer Michael Winner. Michael, thank you so much for coming. Now, it seems to me that Mr. Cameron's saying the industry should produce movies that make money instead of winning obscure awards. Well, if it were that easy, you and I would go and do it tomorrow.
It's a joke. I mean, it's a complete joke. Does he seriously think someone at the British Film Institute, lovely people as they are, is going to be capable of knowing what films will be commercially successful? If he did, he could go to Hollywood and earn $5 million a year. It's nonsense. As William Goldman said, nobody knows anything, but we do know the Americans know a bit more than us because their films make a fortune and ours lose a fortune. And they bandied these figures about, $250 million. That's what the film took gross at the box office. What comes back to the movie is about 10% of that. It's the most misinformed industry.
We're going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps, and our closing song tonight will be from Michael Winner's first movie called The System, released briefly here in America as The Girl Getters with Oliver Reed. Did a lot of his movies with Oliver Reed. The theme song was by The Searchers, that great British invasion band. This song was never really released in the United States, but trust me, it's one of the best you'll ever hear. It's too bad. Would have been a huge hit here in the States. The theme song from The System, Michael Winner's first movie. This is The Searchers.
The system, it's crazy, it's cruel. You think that's when you find out you ain't it's cruel. Come on with a sweet talk, be moody and mean. Give nothing away, the system might shine. Through the system is fine. When you reach the end of the line,